My name's Dave Sweeney. For about 4 decades I've been around Indigenous, nuclear-free resource politics, various trade unions, media outfits, environment organisations here and overseas. But the way I know some of you in this room, and my mainstay has been as a long-term lead of ACF's nuclear-free work. Today isn't a career retrospective for me, but it is a bit of a reflection on some thoughts on the past to help inform and chart some ways for the future. So it's an attempt to distill some thoughts from lessons learnt and fingers burnt that we can collectively chart a course to a habitable, equitable, peaceful future in these extremely challenging times. I first connected with Northern Australian politics in the early 1990s. Mozzies were feasting on me on an unscreened balcony as I was on my way out to Kakadu to meet with traditional owners concerned about direct release of contaminated water from the Ranger uranium mine. So if you fast forward 3 decades, some things have changed, and many for the better. I've just been out at Kakadu for the first half of this week, and it was a profound time and deeply positive. Mining at Ranger has ended. Jabiluka has been stopped. Koongarra is permanently protected. Kakadu, Australia's largest national park, dual cultural and natural world heritage area listed just down the track, was going to be till 2065 an international uranium province. Not one shovel of that poison is coming out of that dirt today, and not one will. Had the great pleasure to do that and walk on their places with Jeffrey Lee, Koongarra, and Yvonne Margarula, and Mira, Corbin, Jabiluka, Ranger, and just to see that strength. And that's some of the things that haven't changed. The generosity and tenacity of First Nations people, the beauty and deceptive fragility of the northern environment, and the profound clash of values between those who cherish a shared place and those who chase a private profit. Now, the North, as you all know, is different. It's different in space, scale and integrity. There are massive landscape-scale opportunities and threats here. The fate of the world's biggest savanna estate, massive river systems, ancient and continuing cultural practice and heritage is in the balance. Now, that's not to say that there's not similar considerations in Southern Australia, but things are often writ larger here. In Southern Australia, the resource sector generally wears suits and shifts dollars. In Northern Australia, it's high vis and shifting landscapes. In Southern Australia, the Defence Forces are most visible when they parade on Anzac Day. The arms merchants cut quiet deals over bubbles in curated 5 stars, and their political win outbid themselves on war spending in the controlled and carpeted corridors of Canberra. But here, the military are much more visible. They're in the ports, they're on the roads, allow extra time, there's an exercise. They're in the skies, and they're doing live firing with deadly intent. Here things are often much more visible. They're often less mediated, but everywhere things are desperately urgent. You're the experts, you don't need me to go through an eco-triage report. But we all know that from the salt water to the red centre, things are not in good shape. Years of piecemeal, short-sighted, deeply irresponsible, gutless, greedy and heartbreaking policies, practices and projects have hurt the North. We are losing species, sites, stories and time, and many are losing hope. Now, the unspoken assumption of automatic northern renewal and repair, that the North and the environment is simply too big to fail, and so it's open to endless exploitation and extraction. That thinking is increasingly evident as deeply flawed assessment and an excuse. It's an excuse. It's a justification for the utterly unjustifiable and a rationale for the profoundly irrational. And against this backdrop, we face 2 existential threats of unchecked climate change, uncontrolled militarism and its zenith of nuclear weapons. Now, one of those reduces our chances every day. The other could end our chances in a day. And our politics, our politicians, our processes, our governments are failing us utterly on both. The federal government is marching us into the high-cost, high-risk AUKUS deal, an ever greater military stranglehold of an increasingly erratic and eroding United States. And they have a Jekyll and Hyde approach to energy. They're generally sensible, albeit too slow at home, by saying no to nuclear and yes to renewables, but they are desperately irresponsible abroad, extracting and exporting fossil fuels and carbon bombs like there's no tomorrow. And every one of those fossil shipments threatens tomorrow. Now, we know this. We carry this knowledge, we carry this grief, and we carry also this responsibility to come together. That's why we come together at this important time and forum, to acknowledge and support each other, to learn, to listen, to back each other, and to build campaigns, common purpose, community and connection. Now, we are all in this room because we are leaders. I ummed about that line because that is sometimes an overused and shamelessly self-promotional word. But it is a powerful word, and it is a much needed idea. We're leaders partly because we refuse to follow. We refuse to follow the path of despair and destruction. But more positively, and perhaps more importantly, we're leaders because we're looked to by our own mobs. We are looked to by our friends, our families, peers, countrymen, schoolmates, workmates, as a litmus test, a reality check, a trusted navigational marker in some pretty tricky waters. And as we know things are desperate and times are hard, and as we think through how do we chart a path to a better way, so are many other people. But many of them don't have our sense of community, our sense of common purpose and shared value. And for lonely people and people who are looking for something, they look to people like us to say, why is this happening? What can we do? Now, every struggle, every campaign has its unique actors, drivers, contexts and pressure points, and each will need its specific and authentic game plan. But there are some universals, and one of these is hope. Hope is actually essential. It is a fuel. This is not a naive refusal to explore the possibility of failure. It's not that. It's a deep belief that change is possible, that effort is important, that people and places matter. And if you put it simply, if you fight, you may lose. But if you do not fight, you will lose. So let's play the odds and fight. As a US writer, Mark Allison, he recently wrote that hope is what we do when odds are long and the options limited. It's the stubborn act of trying when despair feels easier. And rather than a passive optimism, hope is the commitment of those who believe they can make a difference, however small. And in this deeply bruising, rapidly evolving, rapidly collapsing age of extractivism, military empire and uncertainty, we need that hope, because the reality is we are routinely outspent, outgunned and outmanoeuvred. But the other reality, conversely, is that despite this, we are often remarkably successful. We stop bad stuff and start good stuff. We preference community over consumption and people and place over power and profit. And I've seen this over years in relation to the beast that is nuclear weapons. One of the things I've been privileged to be was a co-founder of ICAN, International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Now, 80-year-old this year, these instruments of terror, and they are pervasive and poisonous. The Indian author and activist Arundhati Roy says, "It is such supreme folly to believe that nuclear weapons are deadly only if they are used." She says, "Nuclear weapons pervade our thinking. They bury themselves like meat hooks, deep in the base of our brains. They are the ultimate coloniser. Martin Pritchard earlier today said that EK, with all the great work that it's done, and what a shout out to you Northern Groups, fantastic. EK was started by 3 people at a kitchen table. Well, in 2005, I was lucky enough to share a table with a handful of colleagues and comrades following a spectacularly unsuccessful multilateral non-proliferation circus. And that was a time when despair certainly felt easier. But instead, we set out to make nuclear weapons illegal. It didn't matter that we weren't lawyers or that we could have fitted into a Tarago. And that's how ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, began. Since then, ICAN's grown to 650 groups around the world. 90 nations have signed the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons, this little thing, our best way to get rid of our worst weapons. It's entered into force. Billions of dollars of investment money has been channelled away from nuclear weapons. ICAN received a Nobel Peace Prize. Nuclear weapons have finally and formally been made unlawful in international humanitarian law. And that is a pretty extraordinary outcome from a committed community push. Now, most of our efforts do not get that level of lift, but all of them build, all of them seed, and importantly, all of them matter. Another piece in the puzzle of building a future is diversity in style, in substance, and in strategy. We all know that an ecosystem is healthier and more robust with a mix of sources and with the resulting complex interactions and relationships of that system. But so too are our communities. So too are our campaigns. There is no single master plan for storming the ecological winter palace. And we should be pretty cautious of anyone who says there is, and they have it. The tools and the tactics and the resources that we have to deploy are often pretty piddling compared to those of the drivers of destruction. You know, a little community group goes up against BHP, world's biggest miner. Doesn't seem equal, and it's not equal. But collectively, so often, the little group punches above its weight. It's surprising, but so often true. So the key to this isn't a uniformity of worldview, rather it's identifying and amplifying shared values and aligning our action. At the risk of evoking both Mousy Tung and Bobcatter, let's let 1,000 flowers blossom. It's really the Gulliver theory of social change. Jonathan Swift wrote a book, Gulliver's Travels, and the little folks of Lilliput, they see the beach giant and they tie down the beach giant through the diligent application of thousands of little strings. Alone, each of those are absolutely useless, pathetic. Collectively, they impede the beast and they braid a better future. I spoke earlier about ICAN, and there was a real learning in that about this inclusion theme and story. We drafted the model treaty. Here's a treaty. And then we went around and tried to promote that. And understandably enough, that was met with resistance. And it was met with death by detail as people argued over text. So after a year of stonewalling, we reviewed and changed tack. And we instead started with a question: how can we make nuclear weapons illegal? Started with an assumption, of course you will want to make them illegal, of course these things are obscene, vile, and we want them gone, and you want that too, I'm sure. How can we make them illegal? And then it became a conversation, not a defence of a draft. We framed the problem, but we issued an invitation, not an imposed plan from Central Command. So we didn't try to sell a specific roadmap, but importantly, we did spruik a shared destination. And as the saying goes, it is amazing what you can achieve if you're not too fussed about who gets the credit. And another essential in building a bridge to the past, and this is obviously and properly a really fundamental theme in this gathering, and that is to build a bridge to a living future, we need to acknowledge our long-lived past. The experience of the Australian nuclear-free advocacy has been one of a deep, like an under-resourced but deeply effective movement. And that's because First Nations people's engagement and leadership has been present and critical, absolutely critical. This black-green braiding has been ethically essential, but it's also been strategically smart. The resilience, the authenticity, the conviction that First Nations people so often display in defence of their country and culture anchors a campaign in deep truth. It provides clarity and a profound sense of authority. And really, most of the chatter is froth and bubble or simply piss and wind compared to the power and persistence of country and stories of country. And I've seen this with small groups of Aboriginal people saying no to powerful pushes from successive federal governments to impose national radioactive waste dumps on their land near Katherine, in the Senna, at Muckaty near Tennant Creek, in northern South Australia in the Flinders Ranges, the Eyre Peninsula. There's been multiple fights at multiple sites over 30 years. All have been hard. All have been against the odds, and all have been successful. That power is really clear with Jeffrey, with Yvonne and others, and that power and that work with First Nations is critical. It takes time, trust and talk. It's not a transaction or a photo opportunity, it's a shared journey, because as Uncle Bruce Pascoe says, our fates in this nation are now twinned. I just want to, like our planet, time is ticking and my time's closing. So I just want to finish with a few things, but one thing I really want to stress, and I want to thank the conference organisers for, is putting peace and militarism where it needs to be on the environment movement's radar. For too long that's been slipping into too hard or not core business. It is too hard, but it must be faced. It is fundamentally core business because it is self-evident, should be, that when it comes to building a living future we need peace, especially now, amid a retreat from human rights and the march of military might. We have AUKUS, $30 million a day till 2050s. 30 million each and every day. Imagine for a moment what you would do, what you would solve. There's probably not a problem solvable with money that we wouldn't solve without this. High cost, high risk, low visibility, no impact. Planes at Tyndall, subs in the west, on it goes. It's literally not rocket science. War is simply very bad for people and planet. It must be the very last resort, not the first option. In this context, our work is so vital because there is an assault on nature, on community, on people, on humanity and hope happening right now. And as the architects and enablers of destruction punch down, we collectively need to stand up. We need to resist and renew, and we need to be in it for the long haul. One of the other themes of this is continuity, long haul, inclusion, First Nations, starting to thread out already, in my mind at least. And in the long game, we need to remember that we are not only the drivers of social change, but we also need to remember that every vehicle needs some routine maintenance to help keep the show on the road. The journey works best if we can sustain and replenish ourselves and our spirit and add our little piece of magic to the solution. In Australia, we have the foundations for charting a better course for ourselves and the world. We have strong economy, smart people, tech and tools, diverse community, the wisdom and generosity of the world's oldest continuing cultures, beautiful seas, skies, lands and species. We have the luck of being born on a great planet, but we also have the responsibility of passing through it at a critical time. So we have the responsibility to respect and protect it and us. And simply, there's no more worthy mission. So I am so glad to be here. I'm so keen to listen and talk for the next few days and beyond. I want to thank you for your presence, attention and respect today. I want to thank you for what you've done in your yesterdays and what you will no doubt do in your tomorrows. Thank you very much.